Hello and welcome to Budget 2013, the Economic Matrix. We continue in the run-up to the budget to talk about the macro aspects that are going to be underlining this year's budget. There are, of course, lots of issues at play, from fiscal deficit to current account deficit to growth to inflation, and we're trying to, over this series, put all of it together. There is the issue of social sector spending. Some people would term it populism, others would term it as necessary spending. How should we view it, and what would the government actually prioritize in this year's budget? That's the issue that we are discussing today. Let me just tell you a couple of indicators that have been coming out. There are reports coming out that the increase in the gross budgetary support this year will be very, very marginal. Just a 6% rise being talked about. Apparently, the Planning Commission wanted a 12% rise, but the Finance Ministry was not in favor of it. Last year's gross budgetary support hike was 18%, so that gives you a sense of how tight-fisted the government is likely to be this time around. A lot of the key social sector schemes will fall under that, so one wonders whether the allocation increase to some of these crucial schemes would also be relatively lower. But there could be other elements which could be, some would term as populism. One could be in the form of the food security bill. Again, not everybody would agree that this is populist, but it would mean additional subsidy burden for the government. And then there's the direct benefit transfer scheme. At least some political parts of the spectrum are arguing that the government is rushing forward with this largely on account of political benefits that can accrue. You may or may not agree, but that's the view that's out there in some parts of the political spectrum at least. Joining us to talk about the social sector agenda, how much spending increase we can afford to see right now, Dr. Shubhashish Gangopadhyay will also be joined by Dr. Surjit Bhalla during the course of the show. But let me start with Dr. Gangopadhyay, who's with us from our Delhi studio. Sir, very good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us. I do want to start with the big picture agenda. Enough has been said about the fiscal problem, the fact that we want to control our deficit to about 4.8% as the FM has said. Within that, then, is it inevitable that there would be some sacrifice to be made in terms of social sector allocations, in terms of gross budgetary support, and how much you can hike it this year, sir?
Well, the fiscal deficit has gone out of control, so obviously we need to control it. There are certain social schemes which are very, very important, but the way they have been implemented is completely lopsided because there is too much leakage. So that is something that needs to be checked. And when we are talking about the food security bill, which is certainly on the agenda for this year, the problem is that I'm not so sure that it will really address food security. Of course, we need food security, but I'm not so sure that the way it has been planned is the way to go about doing it. And then, if we still insist on doing that and roll it out, then that will be clear wastage again, and that needs to be checked.
Since you talked about the food security bill, let me just get straight into that, sir. What concerns you? Is it the way the coverage is being defined? Is it the entitlement issue? What concerns you? Is it just the pure increase in food subsidy, or is it, like you said, suggested, it's the structure of the program?
See, first, when we are talking of security of any type, right, in a civilized society, we are talking about every citizen. Now, certainly, when we talk of the food security bill, we are going to spend a lot of time, energy, effort in trying to target who would fall under this food security bill. And I think that's a complete waste of time and resources. Food security is for everybody. Obviously, given the way you're going to distribute the food, most people who can afford it will not participate in this, and they will go out and buy from private shops or grocery stores or what have you. So in that sense, I'm totally against this trying to target people when you're talking of food security. Second, because remember, the food security is not simply a poverty alleviation program, right? It's something that every citizen in the country has a right to, security from hunger. The second thing is the way it is being undertaken. The central government or somebody at the center is deciding how at the lowest level the food is going to be distributed. I think the states should be pulled up if there is lack of food security. At the same time, different states should be allowed to implement it their own way. The channels of distribution should be left to be decided by people on the ground. Why is everything being done over here through the PDS, which we already know is a highly leaking system?
So if the government does go ahead with it, and I'm sorry to be looking for labels here, but would you term it as a populist endeavor, that has some political gains or political thought process attached to it?
Well, if you interpret populism to be pleasing the people, in a democracy you have to please the people. So let us not, even use the term populism. I don't know why it is used in India. So, so obviously you have to do it. There is a definite term in economics that we use when to say which policy is populistic and which is not what we are discussing over here when we come to food security. So, if we are talking of populism, right, making sure that the poor people are targeted, they are given their basic needs, basic health, basic education, these are not called populist. I cannot imagine that anybody will be able to come up with any solid, methodologically correct or a theoretical argument which shows that if you allow the poor not to be poor, if you help the poor not to be poor, it will harm growth. But unfortunately that is where the debate is in India today, that we think that all of this is at the expense of growth. No, all of this is not at the expense of growth. If properly implemented, it will support growth. The question is it being properly implemented? I don't think so.